you everything. My badge,
Calm
my
down.
ID, hospital credentials. I'm supposed to be in surgery at 8. Please, I don't understand why I'm still here.
All you gotta do.
No.
The morning of April 17th started like any other Wednesday for Justine Bradley. She woke at 4:45 a.m., prepared for her demanding surgical schedule at Hennepin County Medical Center, dressed in her green scrubs, clipped her hospital badge to her chest, and departed her modest apartment by 6:30. She was mentally reviewing a complex neurosurgery, a procedure that could alter a young patient's entire life trajectory. She would never reach the operating room on time. Instead, she would spend 32 minutes on the side of a highway, forced to sit in damp grass while federal agents ignored her credentials, denied her requests, and treated her citizenship as something requiring proof rather than respect. What happened next would ignite national outrage and reveal systemic failures hiding in plain procedural language. Before we go further, if this story matters to you, let me know. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe if you believe these stories need to be told, and stay until the end, because what happens next will show you exactly why one bystander's phone and one woman's hidden strength changed everything. Now, let's go back to that moment when Justine Bradley's hands gripped the steering wheel, and everything she thought she understood about justice began to unravel. The flashing lights appeared behind her at 6:52 a.m., cutting through the dim Minnesota dawn. Justine Bradley glanced at her speedometer, dead on the limit. No infractions, no violations, no reason. The black SUV with ice emblazoned across its doors pulled her over anyway. Justine Bradley's knuckles whitened against the steering wheel as the flashing lights filled her rearview mirror. Interstate 94 stretched ahead through sparse morning traffic, flanked by snow-dusted pines. The sky held that particular pre-dawn dimness, not quite night, not yet day. She signaled. She eased onto the shoulder. She parked. She shut off the engine. Her pulse quickened despite her certainty. She had done nothing wrong. Two figures emerged from the black SUV, plain clothes, tactical vests. The letters eyes stretched bold and white across their chests. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Justine's bewilderment crystallized into a single thought: YICE. The lead agent, later identified as Marcus Hale, a 12-year veteran, reached her window. No request for license. No registration. No explanation. Just the command: exit the vehicle. Now? Justine, composed but puzzled, asked why. He repeated the order, louder. She complied. The second command came immediately: sit on the grass. Justine Bradley, board-certified neurosurgeon, Johns Hopkins Medical School graduate, dressed in green surgical scrubs with her hospital badge gleaming, lowered herself onto the damp roadside grass. Vehicles began to slow. Drivers craned their necks. The humiliation hit like a physical force. She gestured to her badge. She offered her identification. She explained she was a surgeon en route to perform a critical neurosurgery. Agent Hale barely glanced at the ID she extended. No database check. No verification. Just an order to sit quietly while they handled things. Handled what? Justine was given no answer. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. Justine asked the basis for the stop. The agents offered vague responses, fragments of protocol, references to procedures, nothing concrete. She requested to stand rather than sit like a criminal suspect. Denied. She asked to contact her chief of surgery, someone who could verify her identity in seconds. Denied. Protocol, they said. No calls until we're done. Done with what remained undefined. Commuters continued to pass. Some honked encouragement. Others jeered at the agents. The agents stood impassive, radios crackling with transmissions Justine could not decipher. Then the pivot point arrived. A pickup truck pulled onto the shoulder 40 feet ahead. The driver, Albert R. Davis, 52 years old, electrician, heading to a job in the Twin Cities, stepped out with his phone in hand. He approached with an unassuming gait, his rugged build and faint supportive nod giving the agents no reason for alarm. He murmured something about keeping things secure. The agents, lulled by his apparent approval, did not wave him away. Albert began filming. The video captured Justine on the grass, badge visible, scrubs muddied. It recorded her steady voice, strained but controlled, questioning the legal basis for her detention. It documented the agents' curt dismissals, their indifference to her credentials. Her voice remained steady, but a tremor entered it when she affirmed her spotless record: no tickets, no violations, no criminal history. She spoke of her duty to patients whose lives depended on her surgical precision. She stated her citizenship, backed by 3 generations of American lineage. Agent Hale replied that if everything checked out, she would be released soon. Yet still no ID check. No system query. 25 minutes elapsed. A third ICE vehicle arrived. Agent Elena Vargas stepped out, joining Hale in muffled conversation. Their voices carried fragments across the cold morning air. Profile match, flagged vehicle, dark-skinned professional. Justine overheard. She demanded specifics about this profile. Silence answered her. She pressed the question, how could a neurosurgeon in full hospital scrubs fit any legitimate suspicion profile? No response came. Albert Davis continued filming, inching closer. He sensed the wrongness radiating from the scene, the profiling masquerading as procedure, the disregard for documentation, the arbitrary exercise of power. Finally, at the 32-minute mark, Agent Hale took Justine's driver's license to his SUV, the first verification attempt of the entire stop. 2 minutes later, confirmation arrived. Justine Bradley, United States citizen, exemplary record, no warrants, no flags, no grounds for detention. Hale returned. He handed back her license. He muttered that she could leave. No apology. No explanation for the 32 minutes stolen. The public humiliation, the baseless detention. Just a curt dismissal, you're free to go. Justine rose from the grass, her legs numb, her scrubs bore mud stains, her hands shook as she fumbled with her car keys, missing the ignition twice before the engine turned over. She pulled back onto Interstate 94 and arrived at Hennepin County Medical Center 45 minutes late. She sat in the parking lot and wept before scrubbing in for surgery. Albert Davis saved the video to 3 separate locations that morning. He had witnessed profiling before, but this? A surgeon demeaned without cause, detained without justification, her credentials ignored as though they were props rather than proof? This demanded exposure. The engine of consequence had begun to turn. The parking lot of Hennepin County Medical Center stretched empty when Justine Bradley finally arrived. She guided the silver Honda into her designated space, shifted into park, and sat motionless. Then the composure she had maintained throughout 32 minutes of roadside detention fractured completely. She wept, full-bodied sobs that shook her shoulders. The humiliation replayed in vivid fragments, the damp grass soaking through her scrubs, the curious stares of passing drivers, Agent Hale's indifferent dismissal of her credentials. 10 minutes passed before she could breathe steadily. She checked her face in the rearview mirror, wiped away the evidence of her breakdown, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The young patient awaiting neurosurgery could not be made to suffer because federal agents had stolen time she did not have to spare. Justine scrubbed in and performed the complex procedure with unwavering precision. Her hands never trembled. Her focus never wavered. But the emotional toll lingered beneath the surface. 40 miles away, Albert R. Davis sat in his pickup truck during a lunch break and transferred the roadside video to 3 separate storage locations: cloud backup, external drive. A folder on his desktop marked with the date and a single word: evidence. He had witnessed profiling before, but this transcended routine injustice. This was systematic dehumanization captured in high definition. Albert possessed no legal training and no platform for activism. He was an electrician who paid his taxes and minded his business. But the video on his phone told a different story, one of systems malfunctioning precisely as intended, of power wielded without accountability, of credentials rendered meaningless by assumptions about skin color. He recognized the footage's value immediately. Without it, Justine's complaint would become her word against 3 federal agents. With it, the truth became irrefutable. That evening, through a contact who worked in hospital administration, Albert reached Justine Bradley. He offered the video freely, asking nothing in return, except that she use it however she deemed necessary. Justine received the file that night and watched it alone. The experience of reliving her humiliation from an outsider's perspective struck with unexpected force. She heard the strain in her voice. She watched herself gesture to the hospital badge that the agents had dismissed. She observed the timeline unfold: 5 minutes, 10, 15, 25, each passing moment documented by timestamp. The agents' tones revealed what she had sensed but could not prove in the moment. They had made their judgment before approaching her vehicle. The bias was evident. The delay was inexcusable. The violation was clear. Within 3 days, Justine engaged a civil rights attorney specializing in Fourth Amendment cases. Within 3 weeks they had submitted the video as core evidence. Within a month the footage aired on national news networks. The media storm ignited with startling velocity. How could federal agents detain a black surgeon in full hospital scrubs with visible credentials for 32 minutes without conducting a single identification check? How could they force a United States citizen to sit on muddy grass while denying her requests to contact her workplace? How could they defend their actions with a description so vague: dark-skinned woman in sedan, professional attire, that it could apply to thousands of innocent people? The questions multiplied faster than ICE could formulate responses. The agency issued a statement defending the stop as part of a targeted operation, but the description they had acted upon proved laughably insufficient as probable cause. Public outrage surged across social media platforms and cable news segments. The video played on loop: Justine on the grass, badge gleaming, voice steady despite the tremor, agent standing impassive while radios crackled. If this resonates with you, consider, what would you do as a witness to such injustice? Would you record it to hold power accountable? Or would you drive past? The answer matters because bystander courage often determines whether truth survives long enough to demand accountability. Share your perspective in the comments, and if this story moves you, pass it along. Justine's lawsuit alleged multiple violations: Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure, false imprisonment, racial profiling, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The video served as irrefutable evidence. It timestamped the delay. It showcased her immediate compliance. It captured the agent's refusal to examine her identification. It documented the humiliation in vivid detail. The case accelerated with unusual speed. Ironclad video evidence combined with intense public pressure created momentum that even federal bureaucracy could not obstruct. An internal investigation launched within 5 months. Verdicts arrived within 7. Agent Marcus Hale was terminated. 12 years of service ended for allowing implicit bias to override basic protocol. Agent Elena Vargas and the third agent received 120-day suspensions without pay. They underwent mandatory retraining on constitutional rights, implicit bias recognition, and proper identification procedures. The agency itself faced broader scrutiny. How many similar incidents had occurred without video documentation? The questions forced uncomfortable internal audits that revealed systemic failures in training, oversight, and accountability mechanisms. Reforms followed: enhanced supervisory protocols, mandatory body camera requirements for all field operations, quarterly bias audits, and revised standards for initiating immigration-related stops. Then, midway through the legal proceedings, an unexpected revelation emerged that transformed the narrative entirely. Justine Bradley was not simply a talented surgeon who had overcome modest beginnings. She was the anonymous donor behind a multi-million-dollar legal aid fund for immigrants facing deportation proceedings. The money came from an inheritance her family's fortune built through innovations in medical technology that she had deliberately kept hidden throughout her professional life. She had grown up underestimated despite her family's wealth, choosing to attend medical school on merit scholarships, building her surgical career without the advantages her surname could have provided. She had been an underdog by choice, proving her worth through competence rather than privilege. And she had channeled her inheritance into defending the very population that ICE targeted most aggressively. When her legal aid fund's attorneys joined her civil rights case pro bono, her identity as its founder became public knowledge. The revelation amplified every dimension of the case's irony. Federal agents had detained and humiliated a United States citizen who was secretly one of the most significant financial supporters of immigrant legal defense in the region. The hidden strength they had underestimated was not merely her surgical skill or her citizenship status. It was her sustained, systematic commitment to justice that they had unknowingly attacked when they forced her to sit in the mud beside Interstate 94. Justine transformed from victim to icon. Her quiet power, both professional and philanthropic, dismantled the agent's defense more effectively than any legal argument could have achieved alone. Her case inspired policy discussions that reached from local police departments to congressional hearings on immigration enforcement practices. The settlement figure reached high 6 figures according to insiders, though exact terms remained confidential, but Justine Bradley had never pursued the case for financial gain. Her family's medical technology fortune had long since provided more wealth than she could spend. What she demanded and what the settlement ultimately provided was a public apology. The statement came from ICE leadership, distributed through official channels and reported widely. It acknowledged the wrongful detention. It admitted the failure to follow basic verification procedures. It conceded that Justine Bradley had been subjected to treatment inconsistent with constitutional protections. The language was careful, vetted by attorneys, but the core admission remained: they had been wrong. Profoundly, inexcusably wrong. For Justine, the validation outweighed any financial compensation. She had been seen, her experience had been acknowledged. The system that had failed her had been forced to admit its failure publicly. Albert R. Davis remained the story's unsung hero, deliberately avoiding the spotlight. He granted exactly one interview, a brief conversation with a local reporter. His statement was characteristically modest: "I've faced enough overlooked wrongs in my own life to recognize them when I see them happening to others." The video just ensures truth wins out over convenient narratives. That's all anyone should expect from a witness to actually bear witness. He returned to his work as an electrician, his role in catalyzing national reform known primarily to those who studied the case in detail. Bystander courage, he demonstrated, required neither eloquence nor celebrity. It required only the willingness to document injustice when comfortable inaction would have been easier. Justine returned to her surgical schedule at Hennepin County Medical Center, but the trauma proved more persistent than she had anticipated. She found herself checking her rearview mirror obsessively during morning commutes, her pulse accelerating whenever she spotted law enforcement vehicles. Nightmares replicated the sensation of sitting on cold grass while strangers observed her humiliation. Therapy helped. So did support from family members who had witnessed her distress. So did conversations with colleagues who validated her experience and acknowledged the additional burden that racial profiling placed on professionals of color, regardless of their credentials. The recovery was gradual, measured in small victories: a morning commute without anxiety, a full night's sleep without roadside nightmares, the ability to discuss the incident without her voice catching. The video itself achieved a reach that extended far beyond the immediate legal case. Millions of people viewed it across social media platforms and news broadcasts. Civil rights organizations incorporated it into training programs on constitutional rights. Law enforcement agencies used it as a case study in what not to do, an example of how implicit bias, procedural shortcuts, and failure to verify documentation could transform a routine stop into a federal civil rights violation. Academic researchers cited the footage in studies examining racial profiling patterns, the psychology of authority, and the impact of video documentation on accountability outcomes. The Bradley case demonstrated several critical failures that served as teaching points. First, the complete absence of initial identification verification. The 32-minute detention could have been a 30-second interaction if Agent Hale had simply examined the driver's license Justine offered within the first minute. Second, the prolonged hold without articulated cause. Justine had repeatedly asked for the legal basis of her detention. The agents had provided no substantive response. So, this violated both constitutional protections and basic standards of procedural transparency. Third, the denial of reasonable requests. Justine's request to contact her workplace was neither unusual nor burdensome. The blanket refusal suggested not legitimate investigative concerns but rather a desire to assert dominance through arbitrary control. Fourth, the inadequacy of the profiling basis. Dark-skinned woman in professional attire driving a sedan described thousands of morning commuters. It provided no particularized suspicion sufficient to justify a detention. The case illuminated broader themes that resonated far beyond Justine's individual experience. It demonstrated how power, when exercised without accountability mechanisms, inevitably trends toward abuse. 3 federal agents had detained a United States citizen on a public highway for half an hour based on nothing more than their intuitive judgment that she fit a profile. Without Albert Davis's video, that judgment would have stood unchallenged. The video disrupted that predictable trajectory. It provided objective evidence that could not be dismissed, reinterpreted, or explained away. It forced accountability where informal power dynamics would otherwise have prevented it. The case also revealed implicit bias's destructive capacity even in the absence of conscious animus. The agents likely did not consider themselves racist. They probably believed they were conducting legitimate enforcement operations. But their unconscious associations between race, suspicion, and immigration status had led them to detain a surgeon whose credentials and citizenship were immediately verifiable. Justine had not sought to become a symbol. She had wanted only to perform surgeries, to heal patients whose neurological conditions required her particular expertise, to contribute to her community through the skills she had spent 15 years developing. But April 17th had thrust her into a role she had not chosen, an icon of dignity under duress, of competence dismissed by prejudice, of hidden strength revealed through crisis. She accepted the role with reluctant grace. She spoke at civil rights conferences and medical association meetings. She shared her experience in interviews and panel discussions. She used her platform to remind audiences that justice requires constant vigilance, that rights must be actively defended rather than passively assumed, and that evidence remains the most reliable weapon against institutional injustice. Yet she continued operating at Hennepin County Medical Center, continued her morning commutes with residual wariness, continued her funding of immigrant legal defense even after her identity became public knowledge. The case had changed her, but it had not diverted her from the work she considered her calling. The resolution remained imperfect. Justine still carried emotional scars that manifested in hypervigilance and occasional flashbacks. The terminated and suspended agents eventually found employment in related fields, their punishment finite, despite the permanent nature of their misconduct. The system that had enabled their actions underwent reforms, but structural problems persisted in immigration enforcement practices across the country. But accountability had been achieved. Evidence had triumphed over institutional defensiveness. An underdog's secret power, her wealth deployed in service of vulnerable populations, had helped dismantle the machinery that had attempted to diminish her. That Minnesota morning had exposed systemic flaws that extended far beyond 3 agents and 1 surgeon. It had revealed how easily constitutional protections could be disregarded when authority operated without oversight. It had demonstrated the essential role of documentation in forcing institutions to acknowledge wrongdoing they would otherwise deny. Albert Davis could have driven past. He could have assumed the agents were conducting legitimate enforcement. He could have minded his business and arrived at his job site on schedule. He did not. He stopped, filmed, preserved the evidence, and ensured that a wrong was recorded and a surgeon vindicated. In the ongoing flood of injustices that characterize any imperfect system, that choice to bear witness rather than avert one's eyes provided fuel for the exhausting work of demanding better. The work continued. The vigilance remained necessary. But on Interstate 94 in Minnesota, for 32 minutes captured on video, truth had endured long enough to force accountability. And that, Justine understood as she scrubbed in for another surgery on another ordinary morning, was how justice functioned in reality, not as spectacle or sudden transformation, but as method, persistence, and the grinding accumulation of evidence too substantial to ignore.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.